Happy day, Internet. My name is John, and this is my channel, The Intermancer. If you've watched the previous episodes, then you're probably a personal friend of mine, and you've heard me rant to you endlessly about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. That being said, I do want to expand my viewership, and so I think it's good at this point, episode 4, for me to talk a little bit more about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. A couple of years ago, as everyone here is aware, generative AI came onto the scene and has completely transformed the world. In a lot of ways, we're still catching up to some of those transformations. The impact in my industry, the software development industry, has been profound. In some ways positive, in some ways negative. One of the negative ways is that the way software developers have engaged with AI has not been helpful in developing their own skills. This has been widely explored in other vlogs, so I'm not going to go into details on that. But suffice it to say that if you are using Copilot in your IDE to complete your lines or to write your methods, then you're probably not learning how to be a good developer. I think I'm already a good developer, but I want to learn how to use AI to be a better developer. I am fairly well convinced that this is something that is going to take practice. Here's the problem for a lot of this. The way most people use AI to code is that they turn over a lot of their responsibilities to the code. I think that's been a problem. I think that that will continue to be a problem. That problem is going to grow. So what do we do about it? We have to learn how to be effective developers using AI as one of our tools. We have so many tools. And AI gives us many more tools than we had before. So this channel and this project is more an exercise in me learning how to use AI effectively. Originally, when I first conceived of the channel, I thought that I would do everything in public. I thought that I would record my learning experiences. But my learning experiences are slow, take many hours, and would not make for good content. So what I'm doing instead is I am coding ahead on my project, and then I'm recording these videos as a kind of retrospective, a story time experience for what I'm doing, what I've learned, and how I'm growing. The project is an interesting one. Maybe it will become something. But what the project becomes is almost beside the point. Really, what I'm more interested in is learning how to use AI effectively as a supplement to what I consider as the normal development process. So, as you've seen in episode 1, I set up a project. I used AI, and it didn't go very well, honestly. It would have been a lot faster for me to just set up the project with my own skills, just knowing what I wanted, but I learned a lot of things. Episode 2, I started talking about the approach I'm taking. Let me talk a little bit more. Most people, when they use AI to support their coding, they use it to complete their thoughts. what they don't recognize, what I feel a lot of people who are using AI to do their coding don't recognize, is that they are turning over their thought process to the AI. What I'm doing is I'm exploring the use of more refined context descriptions to generate large sections of code as opposed to small methods or describing what I want a singular method to do. And instead, I'm taking more of a broad scope approach. And you can see that in the previous episodes. So, that gives you a little bit more of an idea of what I'm doing and why I'm doing this. Let's talk about what I have done since episode 3. What you see here is the code that I ended up with after episode 3. Now, something to note. Actually, here, let me go back. In episode 3 here, I'm going to go ahead and just switch over to it. I noticed a problem. Specifically in my test code. You can see here that the gene test creates an anonymous gene. And the quantum test creates an anonymous, no, quantum test doesn't, chromosome test does. Here we go, an anonymous gene. Pow, pow, pow. And organism test creates the same freaking anonymous gene. So, here's the thing about generative AI coding. It is not thinking. It's not thinking the way that humans think. Humans think in terms of pattern recognition and thought structures. Generative AI thinks in terms of probabilities. So, one of the common problems that you encounter when you look at generative AI coders is that there's a lot of code repetition. Generative AI is not good with recognizing the value of first principles. And one of the first principles of coding is dry. Don't repeat yourself. Generative AI is full of repetition, especially in coding, as you can see. So I wanted to explore for this episode what it looks like to try to dry out my tests and to remove some of this code repetition. One of the things you can see here in my text, in my code, is that I've been storing some of these chats. So let's go back to GetLens. Let's go back to the part where I intend to tag. I've already tagged it for episode 4. Check out to commit. And I want to highlight my conversation with AI. Getting my AI chats into my code, into my repo has been interesting. The AI tools, the various websites, don't like for you to copy paste your conversations, especially if you've been using any kind of integration Like where I have it generate code, it provides a place where I can copy the code and paste it into places. It considers that an integration, and if you have an integration, it really tries to get in your way for exporting that full cloth. I have been playing around with that. I think I did a really good job with this one, but not so much with the next one. I haven't figured out how to repeat getting my chat logs into my project very well yet. I'll get there. So you can see here that I first talked to, well, what I did, let me hop over to Claude, because I like Claude. Claude is what I've been using. This is one of my chats. Here we go. Looking at my projects, I have the Gaia F project, and you can point Claude at your GitHub projects. I think I mentioned this earlier. Here's the thing. I've been pointing it at one version and then updating the context documents so that I'm applying the context document, the new contexts, to the old code. I'm not entirely sure that has been the best idea. You'll hear me talk about that more in the next episode. But for now, that's what I've been doing. This GitHub integration on Claude is pretty sweet. So that is part of how I created this, had this chat. And I told it what I wanted to do. I said, okay, here's this organism domain objects. It describes all these things. And at this point, I had already created, as you know from my last episode, I had already created some of these basic genes. But I was realizing that I needed to step back and dry out the tests for these genetic classes. And so for that, I didn't need the context, this base arithmetic genes context. I only needed the organism domain objects. One of the things that I did for this, where did I put this? Look at this. I realized one of the changes that I would need to dry out the tests is that I would need a class that had test genes, because you can see from my code structure that these tests for the genetic material is at a higher level than the actual genes. So I needed some test genes to test the genetic code. That's what I was thinking. Again, I was exploring the idea of directing the AI to make the changes that I need. So here in my context document, oopsies, I made sure to emphasize that I would need a test gene. One of the things I need to emphasize here in this video is that this comes from my expertise. One of the topics that I'm exploring regularly is the fact that we as software developers must use generative AI to increase our own personal expertise and skills as software developers. If we turn over all of the work to the AI, then those portions of our mind are going to rot. And this is a complex topic that has been discussed ad nauseum in many other technological revolutions in the past. I remember as a child, convenient calculators were just becoming a thing. Calculators that would easily fit in your pocket were just becoming a thing. I know that there was a debate at the time about the use of calculators destroying basic math skills. And truth be told, there's value to that debate. And I don't know the solution to that. I think it's important to have to write out for loops for you to become a good developer. Just the tedium of writing a for loop over and over and over again. What it does isn't about just putting in your time. What it does is it trains your mind to think in these basic structures: for loops, while loops, ifs, the basic control structures of software development have been around for decades and have transcended any kind of language expression. They show up over and over again. And the reason they show up over and over again is because these are valuable things to know, because they're fundamental. And if we're not writing them out, we're not learning the fundamentals. But the techniques that I'm exploring here certainly go around that process. I'm not writing out for loops. I'm not writing out those very basic control structures in my code. I'm consciously trying to hand that over to AI. So this is an interesting problem that I don't know the solution for. So for now, I'm just going to skip on past it. Let's talk about interesting things in the code. You can see from my chat here, dry out tests MD. Let's look at it in its pre-format. That I said, okay, here we're going to have to dry out the tests, create all the test codes. One of the things that you'll see here is that I am kind of enamored with the single shot approach, where I take responsibility for repeatedly recrafting my context and then providing a new chat and saying, okay, here's the context. Here's what I want you to do. Do that. AI has a problem with hallucinations and long conversations. As conversations become longer, the context for the AI becomes increasingly confused. Even if you use something like Claude that gives you projects where you can say, I want these documents to just kind of be a perma context, you still end up losing things and you still end up having hallucinations. So you can see here me starting a new chat from scratch, and hopefully with every episode I remember to do that. And I tell it, all right, we are going to need to have some tests, and we're going to need to dry out these tests. Dry. Don't repeat yourself. Very important software principle that AI does not seem to care about. This is a problem with the thought-driven approach versus the statistical what might probably come next approach. If you're just coding with what might statistically come next, you're going to end up with a lot of repetition. And we're seeing that in a lot of these open source projects. Lots of other YouTube blogs explore this. Okay. Again, as you can see here, me trying to capture my chat log has ended up with partial captures of some of the code. So last, I will kind of just shrink this and go back to exploring the code itself. One of the things that was provided was gene test. As I described earlier, these tests for genes are all specific to the gene itself. So this addition gene test tests conditions that you would expect to need for the addition gene. And you can see here that all my simple genes still inherit from base single data point gene. So they have to test for all of the various things for what might be relevant for those mathematical operations. And I gotta say, I'm a little impressed with how the AI knew what to test for. Specifically, look over here, division gene, test by 0. Of course you need to test by 0, or test division by 0, because as we all know from our high school math class, if you try to divide by 0, the entire world explodes. So you want to test, how does my code behave in that condition? And all of this came directly from the AI, so it's impressive to me that the AI knew to test division by 0. It didn't test multiplication by 0. Maybe that would have been interesting. I don't know. Sine gene test, just made sure it did it right. Subtraction gene test, similarly. Do I need addition and subtraction since they're just a sign on a constant? I don't know. Point being, here they are. And generating these classes, as you saw before, was just a matter of saying, I want simple genes that capture these mathematical operations. It created the genes, it created the test, but it has a lot of repetition in the test. So in the chat, what I did was I updated my context and I said that a test gene was necessary. How did I know that that is the thing that would fix my problem? The answer to that is I have written an enormous amount of test code. I've played with it. I've played with it on my own. I've played with it in a professional context, but I've worked with it. I have expertise, and I am leaning on my expertise. It remains a problem for the reader to figure out how to develop expertise as a junior developer when you're using these tools from the get-go. I don't know, maybe give yourself some simple projects, turn off AI and try to implement simple projects just by hand. Maybe that's a solution. I hadn't thought of that before this. Anyway, creating the test genes allowed all of my test code, as you can see here, to leverage that. And so I did not have to have the same repeated code where gene test, chromosome test, and organism test all had to create the same anonymous implementation of the gene interface. I think at this point, is it abstract class? The same anonymous implementation of this abstract class. So this was more about story time. I hope you're finding my thoughts and my adventure on exploring generative AI to be valuable. And I promise, as I continue, I will learn how to make these videos better and more interesting. Thank you for your time.